Hi, hello, welcome back. My name is Devaraj and I'm a body-based therapist working, to understand, different things that upset us in life, that patterns that control us, where we end up not having really a very good life and seeing them from a bodily perspective. I work quite a lot in low-level sort of mental health phenomena such as depression and anxiety, and today this presentation is about anxiety. Myself, I had a lot of issues ongoing often with anxiety and with the underlying feeling that I'm not okay, or that, I need to do something now to stop what I'm kind of semi-feeling underneath. And even these reflections point a little bit towards understanding anxiety. It's a big deal in the UK, probably worldwide as well. A lot of people have a lot of anxiety and it makes their lives not so good. Not so good. And so in this presentation, I want to show you anxiety from a body-based perspective, which is fairly radical and new, doesn't involve drug interventions or a lot of psychotherapy and investigation, but it is effective. Okay, so the first thing, I've got a few notes here just to help me along, and I've got a board here I'm going to use as well. So the first thing to look at, what we're going to look to help us understand, is that to imagine that anxiety, let me just move my thing. To imagine that anxiety, or rather to consider the overall range of what we could potentially feel, when we start to feel our body, and consider it to be, say, a shape like this. Essentially, this represents everything that we could potentially feel as a kind of free-form map. And say what we're currently feeling or currently comfortable to feel is represented by this circle inside. We're happy in this area, and this area we haven't really penetrated to yet with our awareness. We don't feel that deeply. And imagine that just here, there is like a kind of a hardened complex of something we really don't want to feel. Maybe an old trauma, emotional wound, an area of our emotional psyche where we are unwilling to put our awareness. Okay, it's represented by this thing here. And essentially, it's an area of the psyche which is essentially out of bounds. So that should we start to expand, how much we can feel, or should we be, triggered emotionally by something going on in our environment, this shape starts to expand and move. But when it comes towards this area, a lot of bad stuff, it's tricky. It's tricky. The awareness is not so keen to go into here. And, when we consider what this area might represent and look at our lives, we could see that people can have traumatic experiences as kids. Two basic types of trauma are abandonment, wanting something and it's not there, or invasion, someone coming through your boundaries, which, you didn't invite, too quickly. Can be psychological, can be physical, can be sexual, all sorts of potentials for trauma, abandonment or invasion, basically. And when these traumas happen in early life, the emotional impact tends to be stored away in the body, in the muscle system, because a part of the brain judges that it's not okay yet to feel the depth, the emotional depth that was stirred up by the trauma. And so this could be a trauma, Also, it could be the result of societal conditioning. You might have been brought up in a society, for example, where as a guy it wasn't okay to show any level of vulnerability or emotional pain, or anger, for example. So this could be an area of your psyche where there's a lot of anger or a lot of emotional pain, perhaps, and there's a lot of ideas that you're not allowed to feel that. And thirdly, it could be the result of self-conditioning as opposed to societal conditioning, where you've been projecting an image out into the world of being a certain kind of person, and you don't allow certain feelings to come into that. They're repressed back into the body. Again, anger or pain are the two poles, and it can be close to the societal conditioning and the trauma. So this is just representing an area here where we really don't want to feel. So now the question is, what happens when something triggers our awareness and we start to move towards this area? Well, what happens is what you see around here is like layers of fear and defense, essentially. Fear is like a kind of, a holding where around something that's scary. So we just start to get afraid, but we don't really know what we're afraid of. It's like a kind of holding. And this defensive layer that exists around this traumatic wound is very, very interesting, because the role of the defensive layer is to get you to not feel this. The reality is if you were to allow your awareness to go right into this wound, whatever it is, this conditioning or this trauma, and feel it completely, you would be free of it. It would dissolve completely. It would dissolve. You would be free of it. But what tends to happen is that these defensive layers that are lurking around it activate, and the bottom line is it's not okay to keep moving in the emotional direction we're moving in. And so the experience of anxiety essentially, relates to this. It's one thing that the defensive layer can do. It starts to tell you that you're not okay right now. As a narrative, you need to do something right now. You need to change your state. These are the kind of narratives we get in our mind as we start to approach the wound. And so anxiety is this constant sense, it's like a part of us is being pulled in towards this trauma, and another part is pushing back, saying, no, it's not okay. It's not okay. I need to go and do something now. I need to go and get my mind busy. I need to think about the future. I need to whatever. But the bottom line is to not feel it. And so a lot of people live, people who are a bit anxious, they live in this kind of push-pull world where it seems like something is pulling them into this kind of wound, this trauma, to really feel it. And at the same time, they're constantly pushing back and not really getting in there. And it's obviously not a very satisfying existence to have. If we want to investigate a little bit why this happens in terms of the brain, we can look at two areas of the brain. The midbrain, which is roughly in the middle from about here, and the frontal lobes, which are up here, and which are very characteristic to human development. A lot of other primates have a midbrain. They don't always have the frontal lobes. Let me just move this a sec. And essentially, what happens between these is the role of the midbrain is to get you healthy. In the sense that it wants you to get in there and feel this stuff and be free of it. Because if you go right into the wound and you express the feelings and you allow the feeling in your body, you're going to be free. It's just the energy is dissipated and you can just feel more, and you feel more whole and complete. You have access to the emotions in daily life which have been stored in here. But the role of the higher mind is to kind of keep you in a good space and to avoid getting in there. You easily find yourself in a push-pull dynamic in life where on a daily basis there is some triggering going on. You're constantly getting into a certain type of conflict which starts to pull you in there, and at the same time your defensive layers from the higher mind are pulling back. I don't want to go in there, I don't want to go in there. Push, pull, push, pull. And what is really necessary? So, we've articulated the problem now, I've articulated the issue now. And now we can look, what can you really do? What can you really do about anxiety? And as you've seen, if you follow this map, we need to constantly be slowly increasing the amount that we can feel from this relatively small circle to larger. And as we do so, we come across these traumas which are buried in our psyche. We have to allow ourselves to feel them. When the defensive layer was set up, we may have been only like 1 or 2 years old, and we were too young to feel them at that time. But now, it's decades later, we are older, and we can feel this stuff. But, the defensive layer is there like a kind of soldier who's still fighting a war, 30 years after the war has ended, telling us it's not okay. So the main thing that you practice in anxiety is to recognize the times in the day when you're getting anxious. When the underlying belief system in your mind is that you're not okay as you are, that you need to do something, whatever your defense mechanism is, whatever your backdoor, your escape is, that you need to go and either, get really busy doing something on your computer, or ringing up one of your friends to get a bit of connection, or you need to just, you need to just really think about the future now, spacing off somewhere. And when you see these programs being triggered, the underlying belief is being triggered that you're not okay as you are, to actually sit down, breathe, and feel your body. It's actually all you need to do. All you need to do. Because what will happen is, as soon as you start to breathe and feel your body, you start to process. The reality with this kind of wounding is that it comes in layers. It's layers upon layers of it, with defense, with fear in there as well, and layers of the wound. But as you start to approach, you can start to feel. You start to feel the outer layer. What happens is, something integrates inside of you. Something integrates inside of you. And, you start to process some of these layers. They only exert power because there's such a fear of feeling them. As soon as we start to feel them, we're okay. So, I could be going through my daily routine, and suddenly, it's like I'm not okay as I am. I want to just eat some food, or I want to get on my computer, and there's no real reason for it. I just want to do that, and I say, okay, I'm getting anxious. My defensive layer is being triggered. What I actually need to do is sit down and breathe and feel my body. And in this way, these defensive layers start to stand down. Slowly there comes an understanding to the higher part of the mind, the frontal lobes, that you're not in any real danger. You're just re-experiencing some old wound, and you're actually experiencing it properly for the first time. And so over time, your awareness can start to go into these areas. And that is the basic approach with anxiety. It's all you really need to do is to expand your capacity to feel your body, to feel your feelings. And when we look at body-based therapy, for example, bioenergetics or emotional expression, this kind of thing, rebirthing, these are all techniques where you essentially are opening up the muscle system of the body where the holding is, because these traumas physically are located at a muscular level in patterns of irregular tension, either in one area of your body or distributed across your muscle system systemically. And all you really need to do is to open up those muscles. That's what you're doing in these kind of therapies. Instead of just sitting there and waiting to process the trauma, you're opening the muscles to say, hey, I want to look for it. I actually want it to come now so I can feel it and be free. I want to feel it and be free. And so with bioenergetics, for example, you might be putting your body in some strange positions and breathing and feeling, leaning over, breathing and feeling. You're opening up your lower back where there's a lot of holding. A lot of these kind of traumatic wounds, maybe there's a few more of them, are all lurking around in your lower back. Maybe they open up in your gut, in your throat, the area at the back of your energetic heart. These are all areas where there can be a lot of traumatic holding. In bioenergetics, you're opening up these areas. Effectively, what you're saying is, okay, Mr. Trauma, now I want to get in there slowly and feel you. And then that will happen. When you start to do emotional expression in a workshop, it's not something I teach on YouTube because it needs holding properly. But when you start to do that, you really start to encounter the feelings. And often what you'll see is these feelings are layered with pain, anger. And you go into the anger, for example, and then you feel the overwhelming surge of pain come up underneath it, emotional pain, and you can just be in it. It's so powerful. Your mind surrenders to it, and you naturally process. Emotional expression, another great therapy. Rebirthing is similar. You're taking your mind, using a breathwork technique, taking your mind out of the normal state, and maybe you just naturally move into this and your body releases it. So this is really anxiety, it's not a complicated phenomena. All it really is needed is to recognize that anxiety is happening in your psyche, and to sit down or to stand if you're not capable to sit, if you're at work and you can't sit down, and really breathe and feel what's happening. Breathe through your mouth, ideally. Breathe through your mouth. Feel your body, and it will start to process. As soon as you start to feel it, you start to process. And often there can be layers of, this sounds pretty straightforward, what it does to me sounds pretty straightforward. But in reality, of course, when you start to open up these areas, there can be a lot of old fear, a lot of all sorts of crazy narratives going off in your head about how you're going to die if you feel this. You're really not okay right now. It can be really, really extreme. I work with people, regular people in the group room all the time, and it doesn't amaze me because I've been through it myself. But there's a phenomenal level of fear and all sorts of stuff that we've learned to keep ourselves from feeling what's going on inside. And often when you get in there, it's not so bad. But people go through layers of really believing they're going to die, they've got to kill themselves, their life is useless, worthless, whatever. All sorts of compacted old stories and feelings held around the place. And all you actually need to do is to keep on breathing and feeling your body. So if you're sitting down and feeling and the anxiety comes stronger, keep feeling the body. This is crucial. Don't keep following the anxiety-based for defensive layer stories in the mind. It will come up with layers of increasing, fear-based material to try and get you out of there. But if you carry on breathing and feeling, you will be okay. And each time you go through something, your mind will learn, wow, I didn't die. I didn't feel suicidal. People still like me. I'm okay. I can communicate. I can get my needs met. Maybe all this defense is not necessary. You actually have the experience of it, because that is very, very useful. It's one thing to hear me speaking about it, and maybe you believe me, maybe you don't, or it all seems okay. But when you're right in it, it's very personal and very intense. and you need to get the experience of being in a lot of fear, of breathing and feeling of it passing away and you having processed something. And like that, you can pass through anxiety and you can say goodbye to it forever. Essentially, say goodbye to it forever. Okay, I think that's about all I need to do today, and that's about all I've got time for. So this has been Understanding Anxiety, and I hope it's been useful for you. If you're interested, I run workshops on anxiety and depression, and feel free. I'll leave some. I'll leave some links below and stuff like that. Feel free to subscribe and like and all that kind of thing. Okay, thank you for tuning into my channel, and hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.